B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Friday, November 15th, 2019. And I don't know about you, but this was a 4-day week. We started with the Veterans Day holiday. But it feels like we've lived about 2 weeks compressed into a 4-day time period. Wow. A lot of that has to do with my own efforts to keep up with the public impeachment hearings. Day 2 occurred today in Washington. And I have to concede that since they started at 9 o'clock Eastern, I was not up at the crack of 6 a.m. to watch the proceedings. So I recorded them on my DVR, and I've caught up with much of the testimony of former ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch. And she is quite a witness. We'll get to her testimony in a moment. But what we witnessed today is a new low in contemptible behavior by the president, expressing his deep contempt for any attempt to hold him accountable. Because as Masha Yovanovitch, as her friends call her, was fielding questions first from Republicans and then from Democrats, that's how it works, Trump was smearing her on Twitter. Call him Individual One, the stable genius, our tweeter-in-chief. But this is a new low, and I do not believe we have hit bottom yet, friends. I wish I could say so. But the idea that a sitting president has so little to do, he claims he's not watching the hearings on TV, but there he was, live tweeting right in the middle of her testimony. Must have been quite a bit of executive time on the official White House schedule today, and after Fox and Friends, well, he flipped over to C-SPAN or wherever he wants to watch the coverage. And for a president to demean the office in this way, to show, as I say, his contempt, and to use this kind of contemptible behavior, it really leaves us, I think, reeling. And I continue to denounce Twitter for allowing this man to repeatedly violate their terms of service. We'll get to what he tweeted in a moment. But what he was trying to deflect from is the long-running campaign that was handled by Rudy Giuliani, aided and abetted on Twitter by Donnie Trump Jr., and it goes back to almost the beginning of 2019, where they started to criticize her, suggest that she was a bad ambassador. There were some Ukrainians who joined the effort. And at least if you take her testimony and her presence at face value, she was appalled that in this country with a history of corruption, where the U.S. has tried to root out that corruption in many different ways, that the president would engage in a corrupt back channel, or irregular channel, as Bill Taylor prefers to call it. And so this is just so stinky to see Trump sink to these depths. And it was somewhat dramatic as Adam Schiff interrupted the questioning of the staff counsel for the Democrats to note that the president had been tweeting. He read the tweets to Yovanovitch, who said it's very intimidating. And Schiff said, well, some of us here take witness intimidation very, very seriously. Later, Jim Himes, Democrat of Connecticut, on the committee, said that Trump's attacks amounted to clear witness tampering that could be cited in an article of impeachment. Now, Trump is, can I use the metaphor of the card game Hearts? Do you know Hearts? If you collect spades, they count against you, unless you get all of the spades. Oh, let me take that back. If you pick up individual cards that are in the hearts suit, they add to your negative score. But if you collect all of the hearts and the queen of spades, it's called shooting the moon. And you set all the other players back by 26 points. And Trump is shooting the moon here. He's risking a lot in this bullying public behavior. And last night at one of his mob rallies, I don't even know where it was. I saw a clip of it. But he said, look, this whole Ukraine thing, it's just another witch hunt. And he said, we don't need any help to beat Sleepy Joe. Well, I happen to think you're probably right, Trump. I think Joe Biden is a very weak opponent for you, despite what the polling shows and the way many corporate and mainstream Democrats believe he is the savior of 2020. But Trump has been feverishly working, and he has this expansive network of goons. It's a racketeering case. It starts with Giuliani, then we got Lev and Igor. We got Rick Perry running around trying to set up some corrupt oil and gas deals for his pals from the Texas oil patch. You got Gordon Sondland, this pay-to-play ambassador, so eager to kiss Trump's ass and to show off his ability to get Trump on the phone from a restaurant in Ukraine. And I don't know where this network of corrupt individuals will end. And we know there's corruption related to Turkey. We'll get to the visit by Erdogan and a little bit of a surprise in that visit coming up here shortly. But Trump really feels like he has nothing to lose. He can operate in these petulant and risky ways. And there'll be no cost because he's got the Republicans locked in behind his immigrant bashing and his racism and, I guess, his tax cuts and his appointment of lifetime right-wingers to the federal courts to eventually overturn Roe versus Wade. That appears to be the basis of his lock on Republican electeds and his political base. So here's the tweet that Trump fired off while Yovanovitch was testifying. She started off in Somalia. How did that go? Now, nobody knows exactly when she was in Somalia. And that was a tough assignment for anybody who took it. But the impression is, she was the one responsible for Black Hawk Down, right? Because his low-information voters, that's all they know about Somalia. All right, the tweet continues. Then fast forward to Ukraine, where the new Ukrainian president spoke unfavorably about her in my second phone call with him. That's the one where the memo that he calls a transcript has been released, and I still have not heard any Democrats demanding the full transcript and more information about how the edited version was edited and made public. And Trump's final point is it's a U.S. president's absolute right to appoint ambassadors. That much is true. But it is an abuse of his power and discretion to remove an ambassador because she won't play ball with corrupt back-channel schemes being run by an unappointed personal crony. That would be Rudy. Now, the tweet even caused some Republicans to blink or blanch. Elise Stefanik, who is this young Republican congresswoman from New York State, and she's quite a water carrier for the Republicans. She's in cahoots with Jim Jordan, and we'll get to her disruptive moment later. But she said, I disagree with the tweet. I think Ambassador Yovanovitch is a public servant like many of our public servants in the Foreign Service. Get this, even Liz Cheney, Darth Vader's spawn, said Yovanovitch clearly is somebody who's been a public servant, and I don't think the president should have done that. Ken Starr, the guy who led the impeachment effort, well, it was actually the investigation that went on for years. It started about Whitewater, ended with blowjobs. Ken Starr told Fox News, "I must say that the president was not advised by counsel in deciding to do this tweet. Extraordinarily poor judgment." Over the course of her testimony, Yovanovitch painted a picture of a State Department and U.S. foreign policy establishment held hostage by the whims of the president, most notably via his tweets. There is a wave of tweetophobia, or tweetphobia. I haven't properly coined that term yet, but you know what I mean. There are people who are cowering behind their desks saying, all I got to do is stay off of Trump's radar, because if he finds out about me, he'll tweet me to death. And so when Yovanovitch asked for support from Mike Pompeo and others on the 7th floor, that's the top floor of Foggy Bottom, the State Department, and the word came back that Mike Pompeo didn't want to rock the boat, didn't want to draw more attention to her. She testified that she sought some advice from Gordon Sondland, a politically connected guy, spent $1 million to get his ambassadorship. And Sondland advised her to tweet sweet nothings, that's my term, in the direction of the president. That's how he could, or she could, try to get in his good graces. And this is just another argument that Twitter must be shut down. It really is a blight on our system and the body politic. Here's a quote from Yovanovitch at the closed deposition last month. "I expressed grave concerns about the degradation of the Foreign Service over the past few years, the failure of State Department leadership to push back as foreign and corrupt interests apparently hijacked our Ukraine policy. Moreover, the attacks are leading to a crisis in the State Department as the policy process is visibly unraveling, leadership vacancies go unfilled, and senior and mid-level officers ponder an uncertain future and head for the doors." And they probably stay off Twitter, too. Then there was the stunt that featured Elise Stefanik, who I just quoted as objecting to the president's tweet. But the Republicans staged a little stunt where they tried to insert into the record news articles where Adam Schiff said that he would produce the whistleblower publicly. And this does seem to be a pressure point the Republicans are leaning on, and it does apparently have some benefit to them. We'll get to that in a moment. So the ranking Republican, Devin Nunes, tried to yield time from his block to Stefanik, but Schiff said he couldn't do that because the rules didn't permit it. But that allowed Nunes to say, "You're gagging the young lady from New York? Silencing the committee's only female Republican?" Well, those were the optics, but and Elise Stefanik tried to pile on. Here's her tweet. Once again, Adam Schiff flat out refuses to let duly elected members of Congress ask questions to the witness simply because we are Republicans. That's not even a factual statement on her part. What he refused to allow them was to trade time so that they could call for unanimous consent to enter into the record statements by Adam Schiff related to the whistleblower. So before the hearing began, the White House strategically released another transcript. It's called a rough transcript, a memo of a phone call that Trump made to the Ukrainian president shortly after his election on April 21st. He called from Air Force One, and he didn't ask for any favors. He just congratulated him. And that's when he offered an invitation to the White House. Quote, this is from the White House transcript. "When you're settled in and ready, I'd like to invite you to the White House. We'll have a lot of things to talk about, but we're with you all the way." Zelensky thanked him for the invitation. "We accept the invitation and look forward to the visit." And then that was made conditional. on Zelensky's playing ball with Trump, calling for investigations of the Bidens, Burisma, and Ukraine's role in 2016. So the impact of this hearing, we'll wait to see. But it is, as I say, a new low point. And I think Yovanovitch is a credible witness who described her own dismay, shock at seeing the kind of scam that Trump, Giuliani, et al. Were working in Ukraine. Now to the whistleblower story. As I say, this seems to be one of the major reactions by the Republicans, a kind of neener, where's the whistleblower? So Senate Republicans are saying that if the articles of impeachment are presented to the Senate for trial, that they would add in a deposition or live testimony from the whistleblower. And I think this is a case where Schiff should produce the whistleblower. And we have seen that he did make repeated promises back in September that we would see this person before things kind of unraveled and all these other witnesses came forward. Now the Democrats say, oh, we don't really need the whistleblower. And that then makes this a form of parallel construction, right? They claim the whistleblower tipped them off to this, but now is unnecessary because we have so many more direct witnesses. And so I think to deflate this little balloon that the Republicans are trying to float, I think it would be wise of the Democrats to produce the witness in some form or another. I want to highly recommend a piece by Ray McGovern. We've been buddies now for, going on 15 years. Ray served at the CIA, gave the presidential daily brief to Reagan, and at Consortium News today, he's published Ukraine for Dummies. And this is really important. I've made this point from the first day of Bill Taylor's testimony, that they all stay inside the official narrative of what happened in Ukraine. And Ray takes us all the way back to the Khrushchev era, when Khrushchev, who, of course, ran the USSR, but he was a native of Ukraine, and he made a minor change where he declared that Crimea would be part of the Ukrainian Socialist Republic, not the USSR, and that became important later on after the Soviet Union imploded. December 1991. The USSR falls apart, says McGovern. Suddenly it does matter that Khrushchev gave Crimea to the Ukrainian SSR. Moscow and Kyiv work out long-term arrangements for the Soviet Navy to use the base at Sevastopol. That's Crimea. February 1st, 2008. Amid rumors of NATO planning to offer membership to Ukraine, Russian foreign minister warns U.S. ambassador, "Niet means niet." We made a deal back in the 90s that Ukraine would drop its nuclear weapons, disarm, and that the United States would not try to draw Ukraine into a European or American orbit, including NATO. But in 2008, the Bush administration issued this statement: NATO welcomes Ukraine and Georgia Euro-Atlantic aspirations for membership in NATO. We agreed that these countries will become members of NATO. So there was a delayed response in September of 2013 when Putin helped Obama avoid his so-called red line in Syria. A few months later, in a speech to the U.S.-Ukraine Foundation, the infamous Victoria Nuland of the State Department said the U.S. has supported Ukraine's European aspirations. We've invested over $5 billion to assist Ukraine in these and other goals that will ensure a secure and prosperous and democratic Ukraine. Now, one thing that I don't see in here from McGovern's timeline is that Paul Manafort was pushing Ukraine away from Moscow and into the American/NATO orbit. And that is widely mischaracterized in almost all of the Russiagate and now Ukrainegate coverage. Then Ray covers the revolution, the U.S.-backed coup in Kyiv in February of 2014. Then the instant plebiscite that was run in the eastern part of Ukraine, where, what do they say, 90-some% of the vote supported being absorbed by Russia and separated from Ukraine. I've always had problems with that plebiscite. I thought it was badly worded in a vague way, and it was run so quickly that I've always been skeptical of it. I don't believe it was democratic, but it is a maneuver that stands, is how I would describe it. So anyway, I think you get the picture here, and I've linked to Ray's historical timeline. It's in the show file for today's podcast at peterbcollins.com. Every day I like to take a second to thank the people who support my work here at the podcast, like Brian Massey, Terry Paris, Ted Kelly, and there's Terry Paris again. She has multiple subscriptions, and I just talked to her the other day. I'm very grateful for her support. You can join in, too. Just visit peterbcollins.com. You click on menu, then click on Become a Subscriber. You'll hit the sign-up page, and there you can choose a level of support that's comfortable for you. You can also communicate directly with me via P.O. Box 150-660, San Rafael, California, 94915. As you know, one of the young journalists that I deeply respect is Aaron Mate. And he does regular videos now called Pushback at the Gray Zone. He writes for the Gray Zone and for The Nation. And he, as a freelancer, has also published a piece for Real Clear Investigations. Now, just a week ago, I was kind of spanking them because they revealed the identity, we think, or they think, of the CIA whistleblower, and I do not support that at this time. And in a lengthy article, Mate parallels Phil Giraldi's work that I cited earlier this week from uns.com. And Mate goes back and recaps the sequence of events of Russiagate. And he centers all of his focus on John Brennan, the CIA director in Obama's second term. Contrary to a general impression that the FBI launched the Trump-Russia conspiracy probe, Brennan pushed it to the Bureau, breaking with CIA tradition by intruding into domestic politics the 2016 election. Leveraging his close proximity to Obama, Brennan sounded the alarm about alleged Russian interference to the White House. While some FBI officials expressed skepticism about the Trump-Russia narrative, he turned the page, Brennan stood out for insisting on its veracity. Brennan relied on a Kremlin informant who was later found to be a mid-level official with limited access to Putin's inner circle. And what Mate does not edge up to, and what I've said many times since we learned about this mole in the Kremlin, is that mole may have enabled Putin to play John Brennan, the CIA, the NSA, and the FBI, and that whole gang of 17 intelligence agencies. And I consider it entirely possible that Putin put out little, what do we call it in a mousetrap when you put the bait out? He put out bait. And Brennan took the bait hook, line, and sinker. And I only have a theory there, but let me know if you think it carries some weight in your own minds. Now, Mate in this piece does invest more than I do in the current investigation underway by U.S. Attorney John Durham and his boss, Attorney General Bill Barr. But using the information that has surfaced from that current investigation, Mate teases out some commentary and evidence that indicates that it did start at the CIA, was passed to the FBI. And here's a quote from one of Peter Strzok's text messages to his then lover, Lisa Page. "Think our sisters have begun leaking like mad," says Strzok. "Scorned and worried and political, they're kicking into overdrive." That was on December 15th of 2016. In an April 2017 email to colleagues, Strzok worried that the CIA was deceiving both the Bureau and the public. I'm beginning to think the agency got info a lot earlier than we thought and hasn't shared it completely with us. Might explain all these weird, seemingly incorrect leads all these media folks have. So, I share the suspicions that Mattei has that Russiagate was a screenplay written by John Brennan and his friends. And when the mole surfaced, this Oleg Smolenkov, it made me think that it's possible that in the spy-on-spy confrontation, the Russian spies beat the American spies again. And they are left to lying, covering up, trying to take down Trump with it. So I encourage you to read Mattei's piece. I think it's quite provocative. It is very well documented, as all of the work of Aaron Mattei is. So yesterday, Trump announced, his lawyers did, that they are filing an appeal at the U.S. Supreme Court to try to block the release of his tax returns. Now, I think Trump has a very weak case here because, as we've pointed out, the state court in New York said, look, the issue here is whether his accounting firm should release these records. But Trump is responding with this vast claim, this sweeping claim of presidential immunity. You can't touch him, he says. And the New York Times cites the earlier cases involving Nixon and Clinton, where they asserted executive immunity, and both lost at the Supreme Court. So my opinion here is that the Supreme Court should rule against the president basically by refusing to take up the case. But if they do take up the case, and if he ends up winning, it will tell us way more about the corruption of this Supreme Court and how captive they are to this wayward president. Well, neener, I am no fan of Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the president of Turkey. But Trump was praising him so effusively this week in the Oval Office visit. And he made this bizarre claim that Erdogan has great relationships with his Kurds. Erdogan produced an iPad with videos of what he claims is terrorist activities by two different Kurdish groups, trying to claim that he is righteous in trying to wipe out the Kurds in Syria. But what we're only learning today is that Erdogan handed back to Trump a demeaning letter that Trump wrote in October that ended with the warning to Erdogan, don't be a fool by launching a military operation against the Kurds in Syria. Erdogan was appropriately offended by that. And so I wish YouTube would let me play a little bit of Elvis Presley's Return to Sender. But Erdogan did it, and he didn't have to even buy a stamp. He handed it off in person. No shock, Roger Stone convicted as the jury returned guilty verdicts, I believe, in all 7 counts, mostly of lying to Congress and 1 count of torturing a witness or trying to manipulate a witness. That would be Randy Credico. And Roger Stone, as I pointed out, lied about his own lies. And then he wanted Credico to back him up. Credico was smart. He took the Fifth Amendment, didn't testify in the congressional hearing, but Stone went in and stonewalled. He just lied repeatedly. And this one leftover case of the Mueller investigation wins another conviction for lying, but it doesn't have anything to do with the claim that Russia hacked the DNC, gave that to WikiLeaks, and that's what made Trump president. The oddity of the case is that Jerome Corsi, the right-wing nut who wrote a birther book and, he's promoted a lot of right-wing trash over the years, he did not get called. Prosecutors must have thought that he was an unreliable witness. Meanwhile, Stephen Miller is in hot water. A former ally of his, when he was a top staffer to Senator Jeff Sessions of Alabama, has released a trove, some 900 Stephen Miller emails that were sent mostly to Breitbart. And these got released through the Southern Poverty Law Center, producing an attack from the White House on the Southern Poverty Law Center. But, just like the way Democrats tried to keep you from reading Hillary's emails because they were tainted by Russia, the White House wants you to avoid reading Stephen Miller's racist, anti-immigrant emails because they were released by the Southern Poverty Law Center. So the woman who did this is Katie McHugh, a former Breitbart editor. And let's take a look at some of the shit that Stephen Miller was trafficking in, trying to get items or ideas turned into stories at Breitbart. In some of the emails, Miller informed Breitbart of stories published by the white supremacist website VDare and what HuffPost describes as racist conspiracy theory website InfoWars. That's the Alex Jones platform. And then Miller suggested how Breitbart might promote them. In all 900 emails, they were unable to find any examples of Miller writing sympathetically or even in neutral tones about any person who is non-white or foreign-born. Now, I have regarded him as a deep white supremacist since we learned of who Stephen Miller is. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez issued a statement. As the chief architect of the Muslim ban, cruel family separation policies, Stephen Miller has spent the last 3 years turning his bigotry into policy with Trump's blessing. And he's still at the White House shaping U.S. immigration policy. Miller must resign now. She's joined by a total of 75 Democrats who have signed on to a letter demanding his resignation. Is there a Republican who will join them in demanding the exit of this odious creep? I doubt it. Over at America's Gulag at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, there is a new judge on the bench, Lanny Acosta Jr. of the Army. And he issued an extensive ruling this week that the prosecution, the government, has been violating the rules, shortchanging the defense teams with summaries or redacted versions of evidence, and withholding some material. Deletions, quote, that could fairly be characterized as self-serving and calculated to avoid embarrassment. Now, a lot of that relates to the torture of the subjects who are eventually going to be put on trial. Colonel Acosta also declined a request by prosecutors to reinstate 30,000 pages of court filings that a federal court vacated last year because of conflict of interest of the previous Gitmo judge. Now we turn to coverage of the coup in Bolivia, this from the Associated Press, informing us that the former president will not be permitted to run as a candidate in any new elections, according to the interim self-proclaimed leader. Janine Áñez Chávez, who claimed the interim presidency, also criticized Mexico for allowing Morales to rally support from asylum in Mexico City. And this is all played as a legitimate change of the guard because Evo Morales would not accept term limits, despite the fact that the Supreme Court, for whatever reason, allowed him on the ballot. They're trying this rearguard effort to claim that it was a tainted election, that he shouldn't have run in the first place. And I want to commend to your weekend read a great piece at the Gray Zone Project under the byline of Leonardo Flores, where he details the sequence of events that led to this coup, the involvement of key leaders who were plotting in advance of the October 20th election to launch some street protests, declare that the election was rigged, and overall launch this coup attempt that culminated in the resignation at after military demands on the 10th of November by Evo Morales. It's a very well-written piece that will help you understand how the U.S. has been trying to depose Morales even before he got elected, and we tried to run a coup against him a few years ago. That didn't work. And despite the corrupt behavior of the Organization of American States in intervening in the Bolivian election against Morales, well, we are learning that today from a Facebook post by Bolivian trade unionists, the masses who demand the return of Evo in the Alto area gain control of the police weapons depot there. The police have surrendered. Currently, the masses are advancing on the city of La Paz. The police who are in La Paz are asking the masses of Evo to avoid armed confrontations. They want to negotiate their surrender with the masses loyal to Evo. In the next few hours, the return of the legitimate president of Bolivia to his post of command is expected. Now, this could be wishful thinking, or it may turn out to be somewhat prophetic. Here in California, pressure is building on our Governor Newsom as 50 organizations have joined some 25 mayors in the service area of Pacific Gas and Electric in demanding that the governor grease the way toward public ownership, either through a co-op or through a state takeover. And as you know, I fully support that. So Mike Bloomberg decides he wants to run for president, but he has to clean up a little of his personal history. He's made a lot of sexist comments over the years, including if women want to be appreciated for their brains, they go to the library instead of Bloomingdale's. Then he debuted a computer system, the Bloomberg, said this machine will do everything, including blowjobs. I guess, he said, that puts a lot of you girls out of business. Lawsuits portrayed the early days of Bloomberg as a frat house with employees bragging about their sexual exploits. So he's got a little Me Too cleanup. I'm sure he'll use the phrase locker room talk. It worked for Trump. But now we learn that his campaign, even though it's not formally announced, is going to spend $100 million on online ads attacking Trump. They say Bloomberg won't appear in the ads. They're just going to be critical of Trump. And if you live in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Arizona, look in your online ads and social media feeds for Bloomberg messages. Here's another candidate nobody asked for, as if Cory Booker, is not offering a pattern or some sort of a prediction to Deval Patrick, the African-American former governor of Massachusetts. They're both, centrist corporate Democrats, and they're black. And I'm sorry to say that Cory Booker is getting zero traction this year. I think he is attractive to certain sectors of the Democratic electorate. But I don't know where Deval Patrick thinks the votes are, particularly since he's from Massachusetts and Elizabeth Warren is running from there. So we shall see. Those two gentlemen, Bloomberg and Patrick, will not be on the stage next Wednesday. The latest Democratic presidential debate will feature Biden, Booker, Buttigieg, Gabbard, Harris, Klobuchar, Sanders, Steyer, Warren, and Yang. And Twitter has clarified its political ad ban. They are saying that they will accept general policy ads and position ads from nonprofits and other organizations, but they are banning candidate advertising. They say that ads that discuss elections, candidates, parties, and other overtly political content will be prohibited. The restrictions include removing advertisers' ability to target specific audiences on the ads that will be permitted to run. I am no film critic. Yesterday, I advised you to see the new movie called The Report. It should be on screens across the country this weekend. That's the one about Dianne Feinstein's effort to expose and publish the CIA's torture documents. Here's another film that I recently saw that's hitting the big screens this weekend, and it doesn't have any political content. It's called Ford v. Ferrari. And I think it's a great action picture, and I don't like action pictures. but the racing scenes are fabulous. Matt Damon plays Carroll Shelby, the auto, what do you call him? He wasn't a manufacturer, but he was a designer of racing cars. And Christian Bale plays the driver, Ken Miles, who was not cool enough for the Ford Motor Company when they wrote the blank check to Carroll Shelby to develop a car that could win at Le Mans. It's got a really good storyline and great action sequences, so if that appeals to you, check it out this weekend. And finally, I want to say farewell to a friend here who was one of the leading defense lawyers in San Francisco for many years. Patrick Butch Hallinan passed away October 8th, and the family delayed the announcement. There hasn't been a memorial yet. But I wanted to take this moment to thank Patrick, because he helped me on one of the most difficult undertakings of my life. It appeared impossible in the early 1990s that we could get the parole system in California to work for my friend Dennis Jones. He had been locked up at San Quentin for over 20 years at that point, behind a bogus second-degree murder conviction. And Pat Hallinan took on the case for a fixed fee, and a pretty low one at that. And then I got B.B. King and Carlos Santana and my buddy Roy Rogers to perform a benefit concert. And with Hallinan's co-counsel, Ken Wine, we were able to make a presentation to the parole board with a little back-channel influence from the Republican governor at that moment, and we won parole for Dennis Jones. Pat Hallinan passed away at the age of 84, and I honor the work that he did during his lifetime advocating for the accused here in San Francisco. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. You'll find it on YouTube. You're free to share it all over the place. And I am Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to